Transition, and that in itself keeps it engaging. Because how many times have we seen sessions where maybe it's attack versus defense or some sort of practice where the defenders want to practice it there? So again,
I know what is my philosophy, what do I believe.
Right guys, welcome to the Coaches Conversations with Pete Yas. My name's Yas, I'm a UEFA A licensed coach and coach developer.
Hi, I'm Peter. I am a coach developer and also an A licensed coach.
Awesome. And this week's conversation is in partnership with St. Mary's University and a Masters in Performance Football Coaching. And over the next few weeks, we'll be looking at a range of different conversations and just offering our insights and observations around different topics. So Pete, today's topic, where do I start with my session planning?
Yeah, so when we're talking about session planning, people want to go straight in and say, oh, I'm going to plan this session and I'm going to do this. So I'm going to do a 2 versus 2 or a 3 versus 3. I'm going to do a full game, or I'm going to do a passing session or whatever it is. But your first thing that you've got to understand is, first of all, you have to understand your players. Because that's really, really important. Because you might set something up for your players that it's either too easy for them or it's too hard for them. So you've got to be able to deal with that. The second thing as well you've got to think about, you've got to check yourself. Well, what's my knowledge of the subject? Where am I getting my information from? What am I, where am I in my journey? So have I just finished playing? Have I played for a long time? Have I never played before? Am I just really a real football enthusiast, but I want to get into coaching? All those things you've kind of got to take into account when you're starting your coaching journey, when you're starting with your planning. Because it's not just as easy as going, I'm going to put this amount of people onto the pitch and do this, this and this. Because you have to understand also, what are you going after? Are you working in possession? Are you working out of possession? Are you working within the principles of play? Those are very, very important. You know, how do you use the step principle, which we can talk about a bit later. But all these things, there's a myriad of things that you've got to think about before you even put your piece of pen on your piece of paper or on your iPad or whatever it is you're going to be using.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of considerations there. But if the coach is now looking at this thinking, that's all well and good. I understand that. I've got to know my players, understand what's too hard, what's not too hard for them. It's a concept that I like to look at as can you find the flow of your players? Can you find the flow of your practice to the point where it's not too stretching, it's not too under challenging to the point where they'll get bored, but not too stretching where they think, actually I can't do this, I'm disinterested now. So it's finding that right balance, right? But I think one of the challenges that a lot of coaches are going to have is, how do we find the right type of sessions that engage and cater for everyone within it? Because obviously when you've got different abilities, different needs, different wants for the players within it, but also different understanding and appreciation for the type of practice that the players are actually involved in and what that means for their development. So I mean, from that perspective, where do you start? Like, do you start with a theme in mind? Do you start with looking at the individual needs? And you talk there about the step principle, and maybe you can delve a little bit deeper into that in terms of what that actually looks like and how that then plays a part in this process. But also, you mentioned there about the individual as the coach, what their experiences, what does that look like, and how does that then inform and maybe influence what the practice ends up looking like as a result of, in many cases, someone as a coach, especially starting out their journey, probably delivering sessions in the way that maybe they were participating in as players, or have been working alongside someone else as a coach, and just now, actually, that's what coaching looks like, so I'm just going to copy that when I go into my environment. But obviously, as time goes on, we recognise that does change. So, where do we start with that?
I think it's as you said, it's very multifaceted. So first of all, what age are your players? That's the first thing. Okay. So what a session looks like to an 8-year-old will look totally different to an 18-year-old. So having that understanding of the players. Now, at 8 years old, probably you just want to make the session fun, because you might just want the kids to come back next week. So that might be where you're starting from. What kind of session can I do? Might just be some sort of game that has it's footholds in football, but it might not be a football type game. It might be like a catching game or a tag game or something like that. So we might start there. But then you've got the other thing, haven't you? As you said, you talked about varying different abilities. Well, you as a coach, you have to start to look at, well, is everybody engaged? Is everybody having fun? Are there lots of smiles? And if there are, then great, you're doing a great job. But also the big thing is there some learning going on? Because if there's no learning going on and they're just sort of like running around like crazy people, you know, throwing themselves on the ground, there may not be any learning. So you have to check for the learning, because that's really, really important. Because you want them to be able to leave the session knowing something they didn't know at the start of the session. You know, whether that's about how you move, how you avoid somebody, how you make sure you don't fall over. And that's only talking with very young players.
Yeah.
If you take that on to older players now, yes, it doesn't mean to say that you are doing a session and it's not going to be fun, because fun is still part of that. Because people come to football because they want to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, but I think there's also that consideration for coaches to think about, actually, does the session always have to be fun? Is there times where it's not going to be fun because of maybe what you're particularly working on? So, you know, I can give you an example. You know, you're a defender, I'm a forward as an example, but the practice that we're doing is much more focused around my needs.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean to say that you
No, and I get that, but then there'll be an argument that, you know, well, this isn't fun, so I'm not engaging with it. Yeah, but it might not be fun for you, but then it's how do coaches then get the players to appreciate and understand the value that that practice then has for them, although they might not necessarily see the enjoyment factor from the get-go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but what is fun?
Right? It's individualised,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. It might be that I find it's fun if I'm learning technically.
Yeah, I mean,
tactically.
But then that's a perception based on experience. I think one of the things that I've learned over the years, and it's interesting you talk there about ages and stages, and a lot of my experiences are kind of with that 14 to kind of 21 sort of age range, and I used to think that what I'm about to share now was probably quite relevant and specific to them, but I was only just based on my experiences. And then as time's gone on, I've now experimented the same approaches with different age groups and understood actually this is just any player. And it was fundamentally as well, how do I keep them engaging? Well, it's got to be competitive. There's got to be an element of competition. And the easiest way to get that for me was bring transition into my practice. But transition in a way where there's a meaningful outcome to it. So it's not just transition, we win the ball and then we change over. No, it's actually we win the ball and actually there's a further goal beyond it. It's, you know, if you like, it's like levels of a game. You know, the first level was winning the ball back or not. The second level is now, right, what do I do with it once I get it? Am I playing a pass or do we end up with a finishing of a goal or whatever that? And then incentives within that. So it's having that competitive edge, having the incentives in there and the transition piece. And again, I used to think that was quite specific and relevant to just the older age groups of where most of my experience was. But as time's gone on and I've worked with different age groups and learned, actually, these are three key things that I include in all of my sessions. It's got to have incentives in terms of competition, in terms of potentially point systems. It's got to have transition, and that in itself keeps it engaging. Because how many times have we seen sessions where maybe it's attack versus defence, or some sort of practice where the defenders win it, practice is dead, or attackers have won it, practice is dead. All of a sudden, you know, it's going to take maybe 2-3 reps before some of the players are just checking out.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, because it's what's in it for the players. There's got to be something in it for the players. So if I'm doing say for example, some sort of 4v2 practice, what's in it for the two? Why are they going to work like really hard if there's nothing in it for them? So it might be that you might, before trying to keep possession, you might have two little mini goals. You see, if the two win it, they can score in the mini goals. Because if they were to win the ball in the game, they would have to do something with it. And it might be that they might pass it to a player. You might put the goals in different areas of the pitch, and then you have to go and find a way of getting the ball into those. And I did something like this last night with some players where I had 2 goals for the team that were attacking or had possession of the ball, and 2 goals for the team that were defending. I had them offset for the defending team. So if they went high in the press, they were able to score, and if they were low in the press, they could score as well. So there was something in it for them. But also the other thing is it's about time. How much time do you leave them in there for? Because you can't kind of leave people doing that defending piece forever and ever and ever, because they'll run out.
But that's where the incentive comes, right? Because it's that piece. You know, I often work with kind of a principle of, you know, I work into kind of sets and reps of work rather than 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Just let you play. No, you're gonna do this 90 seconds. A lot of the practice I like to work on really high intensity. So based on that being the case, is if I give you an incentive, and typically whether you're a defender or attacker, you more want to be spending time on the ball than off it. So then I use that to my advantage, where I say, right, well, if you're the defenders in this practice, in order for you to get out, you've got to be able to do X, Y, Z. And if you can do X, Y, Z, and you might have a 90-second allotted time, but if you can do X, Y, Z sooner than that, well, you can come out.
But you said that you like your sessions to be high intensity.
Yeah.
But do they have to be high intensity?
No, but I think my experiences have shown me that if I can get them working at high intensity to start with and appreciate that piece, that for me is like the first step or first rung on the ladder towards them developing. If you're like, I think if they can pick up the intensity of what they're doing, and then we can use it almost. Probably the easiest way to describe this is it's like you're like making a pot of clay, right? You start with that, you build it up. You've got the foundation there. If the intensity is high, and now I'm polishing the finer edges around it. Whereas I feel like if I start with polishing the finer edges before I've actually built up the level of intensity, it's probably changing fundamentally the techniques and the application, possibly the thought processes that go into that aspect of things. That once they get there.
Yeah, I see it this way: is that technique drives intensity.
Yeah.
So if your players have got poor technique, you won't get intensity. So you have to kind of think about that as well. So you might be working towards intensity, as opposed to saying, well, if I start with intensity, what happens because that's where your frustration will come in, I think, is that because the players may not be technically good enough, it breaks down a lot.
Yeah.
So the intensity drops. Because you're looking for intensity, you go, come on, I want more intensity, I want more intensity.
Yeah.
The players get more tense.
I get that. I think what I would say to that is that, on my experience is that actually with the intensity being raised as the first kind of point of call, if they are struggling with the technical aspect of it and they're actually applying techniques within the level of intensity, it's that I feel like, from my experience, I've probably got bigger buy-in credibility from the market. Well, now help me with my technique. How does it develop within this intensity? Because if this is the intensity I'm expected to work at, I want to perform at that level, not get the technique right at lower intensity. And there's no right or wrong fundamentally, but it's just looking at, well, if that's the intensity, then what's the level of technique I need to get to that? And then looking at and assessing players on, it's not what you're able to do necessarily, but it's what your application is pushing you towards. So how aware are you of what the fundamental factors are around how you're going to get the success, and how obviously the progression and development aspect of it is how consistent can you be in applying those things?
Yeah, I can see that. I still think that this the idea of that technical piece is really important. That piece around, like if you're going to pass the ball to me, say for example, you're going to need half a park. But if you're going to pass the ball to, say, a Lionel Messi, he needs about 3 or 4 inches. Yeah. Because his relationship with space is so good. So I think when we start to we go back to our original pitch, which is around the planning of our sessions, the thing is we've really got to focus on this idea of, well, what are our players' capabilities? Because if we understand that, we can now start to design our practices. So when we talked earlier about step, so if I want players to be comfortable on the ball in certain areas of the pitch, to start off with in the practice, I make those areas a bit bigger for those players, so it's harder to press them initially. And then as the game goes on, I might reduce the size of that area. Or what I might do is, the other thing is, when we talk about steps, so we talk about the space, and then the task might be to try and get the ball and play out. The kind of equipment that we use, obviously, we not tend to use cones or flat spots, but the people piece there could be important, because I might say, right, when you receive the ball, one player from another zone is allowed to press you. But if I want to drive intensity now, I might say, right, 2 people can go and press you. So it might be a 2 versus 1 in there, and it becomes a 2 versus 2. Then that drives your intensity. because you know you're going to get pressed. You're going to have to make a decision. Do I keep it? Do I run with it? Do I pass it backwards? Whatever. Do I just smash it out of the ground? Whatever decision I make will be dependent on how I set that up with the step principle, say for example. How I set that up with the knowledge of my players. So quite often we see younger players being asked to play in certain ways, so back or whatever it is. Well, okay, if you're going to play out, so why don't you dribble it out? Run with it. Don't try and pass it. Try and if you can beat someone. Now coach will go, oh my God, why did they lose it? If they're 8, it doesn't matter. They won't remember that game in 2 years' time. But what we're trying to do is trying to build something. So again, we go back to our where do we start our coaching from? Well, where am I? In what do I know? What is my philosophy? What do I dearly believe in around player development? Right? Am I risk averse? So I might be a coach. I don't want you to take any risks. But if I'm not risk averse, then all of a sudden I'm going to ask players to do things that they may not be uncomfortable with. But if they're young, they won't be uncomfortable with it because it's what they're used to, because that's like their first introduction to football. So it's those.
So setting that as the expectation, the standard that they're working with.
Exactly, and that's really, really important. I think is that I'm talking about younger players here now. But what does that look like when they get to 10, to 12, to 15, to 18? Now you may have them at 8, but you may not have them at 18. So again, that's another piece there. But what am I going to give them as 8 if I know I'm not going to keep them? So I just finished with an under 16 team recently. Now, one of the things I was working towards was the fact that I know that I'm not going to have those players after under 16.
Sure.
They're going to be going into under 17, under 18 football.
But
what are they going to look like when they go to someone else? When somebody else goes and says, oh yeah, I want that player to play my under 18s or whatever. And if they don't have those basic skills, because that's those things that they're going to go, they can pass it, can they run with it, can they dribble, can they shoot? If those things aren't in place, people will go, oh, where did this person come from? You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. It's understanding what's our part in their journey. Where are they?
100%. I think it's also really important to identify and understand within that though is the bit that we have to offer as coaches something they don't actually need right now.
Maybe.
Because I think I just say that to really kind of challenge coaches to think about, well, how much value am I adding? Where am I adding value? And what are the gaps that this player needs that I haven't been able to fill? And set yourself a challenge around how do I go away and get some of that experience, that knowledge that's going to help me plug those gaps. But no, let's just summarise it in Pete. Where to start my session plans? What's some key considerations you want people to think about? So
where am I in my journey? Okay. What do I want to achieve with the players at their age and stage? How do I use things like the step principle and also the principles of play?
Awesome. Well, there you have it, guys. The coach's conversation with Pete and Yas. This week we were discussing where to start with your session plans. Next week we'll be looking at part 2 and delving in a little bit further around observation skills and how to develop those further too. Thanks, Pete.
Yes.